This is the first electric Acura. It's also the most powerful SUV they've ever built. It's the 2024 Acura ZDX, and in this video, we're going to find out if it's any good. Let's talk about the elephant in the room up front. Like the Honda Prologue, the Acura ZDX is based on the General Motors Ultium platform, just like its direct competitor from Cadillac, the Lyriq EV. That makes a lot of sense. The reason Honda and Acura entered this joint venture arrangement is it allowed the ZDX to come to market sooner, it allowed it to be less expensive than it would be otherwise, and it allows it to be built in the United States with the battery that's also built in North America. And that means that this qualifies for the full $7,500 federal tax credit. It made a lot of the sourcing of materials easier as well because this uses the same battery cells as those other made in North America EVs. Now let's dive into the design. Obviously, it looks just like the rest of the Acura lineup up front. We have the same sort of chicane headlights there. Those are of course also going to be the turn signals, the big, slim, multi-module LED headlights that I've always liked in the Acura design, and even the Acura Shield grille there, even though it's not actually doing any grilling. We have a light strip there instead to help define it more from the bumper. All the cooling is happening down there at the bottom. So what is the ZDX? Well, it's a mid-size luxury two-row EV. It's about the same size in terms of exterior dimensions, length and width, as the Acura MDX. It's 197.7 inches long, meaning it's a full-size category above the Acura RDX. It's about 10 inches longer than that model, only 1 inch shorter than the three-row MDX. But as you can see, the roofline, it's a lot shorter than the MDX or the RDX. That's of course because aerodynamics is important for this kind of vehicle. This is about a foot longer than the Genesis GV70, which I would call a direct competitor to this, because even though this is on the long side of things, you'll notice why up front. It has a really long front hood profile. It gives it this very distinctive rear-wheel drive profile, and indeed, you can get a rear-wheel drive ZDX, but of course it's an electric car, so there's not exactly a lot going on up front. Today we're taking a look at the Type S. So we have the Type S badging there, we have the adaptive air suspension, which gives us 7 inches of clearance nominal, up to 8 inches maximum in snow mode, and down to 6.4 inches of clearance in sport mode. 8 inches is on the high side for an EV in this segment, so if you're looking for something with a bit of extra clearance, but not necessarily an eye towards off-roading, you might want to take a look at the ZDX, at least in this Type S trim. We also get these unique 22-inch wheels. Let me know what you think of the design. I am really digging this particular wheel look here. These are wrapped in 275 40R22 tires. The Type S has the choice of all seasons or summers. You should know that these are the summer tires, and that's going to be important later in the episode. And of course, no Type S would be complete without upgraded braking, so of course we get these big yellow brake calipers. They're 6-piston Brembos. An important thing to remember with the ZDX is that this is a very style-forward EV. Acura was not trying to create an ultra-pragmatic electric box. And that's why we have this really swooping style here with this almost horizontal shelf at the back of the vehicle, a body that really flares out. But for me, there is one styling touch that's a tiny bit controversial, shall I say, and it's this little swoop right here. Here's what's going on. This is a window, this is not, this is part of the roofline. And I sort of wish it had just been a little bit squarer, because for some reason I'm getting sort of hearse vibes with this. The strong shoulder design continues around back. There again is that sort of shelf-like design right there. We have the window on top with a wiper. A lot of folks are going to be happy about that, although I am surprised it's not tucked up under the spoiler. We have slim full LED taillights that definitely look like the rest of the Acura lineup. I love the fact that the turn signal is amber. Over here we have the E logo because that's what Acura and Honda are both using on their electric vehicles. And then obviously lots of shiny black plastic down here at the bottom of the bumper. I am a little bit concerned about how that is going to wear over time, because if I open the hatch here, you'll notice that this black plastic section is exactly where bags and things like that would end up rubbing if you're getting them in and out and you're a little bit careless. Now let's get to the greasy bits, or maybe I should say the electrons. Under the body there is a 102 kilowatt-hour lithium-ion battery pack, again made in the United States if that's of interest to you. But no model is going to have a front trunk, even though there is a rear-wheel drive only version of the ZDX. That's going to use a single motor in the back, 358 horsepower, 324 pound-feet of torque, and that's going to be the longest range model. 313 miles. If you get the all-wheel drive option, range doesn't actually drop by much. 304 miles, but power goes way up to 490 horsepower, 437 pound-feet of torque. If you want the most powerful Acura, That's going to be the Type S. 499 horsepower, so a little bit of a bump there, but a massive increase in torque, 544 pound-feet, thanks to the twin electric motor setup. Range, of course, goes down, but there's another surprise. It doesn't go down by as much as I had expected. 278 miles in essentially the 500 horsepower version. That is significantly further than you'll get in a Lexus RZ or the Genesis GV70. Two definitely direct competitors to this, and actually pretty competitive pitted against the upcoming Polestar 3, which I guess you could say is a competitor to this, and of course the Tesla Model Y. Remember that Tesla calculates their range just a little bit differently than some companies. Charging happens on the front fender behind door number 1. We find the pretty typical CCS and J1772 combo, but with one of these little rubber plug things, which is not my favorite because it's left to just dangle there and bang on the paint. I would rather that it just had a door that covered the whole thing. And interestingly, this door actually does seal around this rubber seal. So if I were you, I would probably just pull that off and throw it away. At any rate, DC fast charging is going to take longer than a lot of the competition. This is going to peak at 190 kilowatts, but the 20% to 80% charging time, which is what they give us as far as the spec, is a little on the long side. It's over 40 minutes. 10% to 80%, like most manufacturers quote, is likely closer to an hour. And you can go 10% to 80% in a Genesis GV70 or a GV60 in under 20 minutes. Now let's start diving into the interior. First, the front seats. Since I'm driving the Type S, this has the most adjustable seat available. We have inflatable bolsters, we have an extending seat thigh cushion, and we have 4-way adjustable lumbar support along with memory settings for both the driver and the front passenger, and a powered tilt telescopic steering column. These seats are a little bit more relaxed, a little bit more reclined than either the RDX or the MDX, and they don't quite feel like either of those options. I have to say that after a day in these seats, both Travis and I felt that the seat bottom cushion needed just a little bit more cushion. Moving to the back seats, legroom and headroom are sort of middle of the road. This front seat is all the way back in its tracks. As you can see, I have a reasonable amount of legroom left, but not quite as much as you'd find in some. However, this is certainly roomier than the GV70 or the Lexus RZ. And we have a completely flat floor in the back. And that's a little bit different in something like the GV70 because that is essentially a converted ICE platform. This is on a dedicated EV platform with that completely flat floor. This model has the optional 3-zone climate control, rear heated seats back here, an AC outlet, and 2 USB-C charge ports. Decent amount of headroom. Now on the charts, it looks like headroom is a little bit more limited than some, but I still have a generous maybe 1.5 inches of headroom here, even in the outboard seating position, which feels a little bit higher off the ground actually than the center seating position. We have 2 sets of child latch anchors here, and one benefit of having the center seat a little bit lower in here is that a child seat will actually fit a little bit further back in the seat, and that means that those rear-facing child seats are going to be easier to fit behind taller folks up front. Rear passengers get a fold-down center armrest, and the rear seats fold in a 60-40 fashion. The main reason that rear seat headroom is below something like a Tesla Model Y is right above me. We have a large panoramic moonroof that has a power shade. Behind the power hatch, we find a reasonable 28 cubic feet of cargo capacity. Keep in mind this is more of a style-forward EV, so they really rake the rear hatch a bit. And then we have those wide buttressed sides there, and that does cut down on the cargo capacity versus something that would be about the same size but a lot boxier. You will find I would say a more practical cargo area in the Acura RDX, even though it's not really that much differently sized. Obviously, you'll find more cargo room in an MDX if you don't have the third rows occupied. As we take a spin around the interior, keep in mind that this is the Type S model, although the base trim is actually pretty well equipped already. The base trim is of course called the A spec. Up here we have the controls for the large panoramic moonroof that is standard at the moment. We also have the buttons for the OnStar telematics system and sun visors that slide side to side. The headliner is not quite as nice as we see in some Acura models, but I think it's okay for the price tag. We also have fabric-coated pillars that we'll take a look at in a second. Now, up here we have, again, this large panoramic moonroof. The front pane opens, but the shade covers the entire section there. The Bang & Olufsen sound system is standard in all ZDX models, and it contains 4 ceiling speakers, 2 back there in the rear passenger area and 2 up here right next to the B pillar for the driver and the front passenger. We get height adjustable shoulder belts and height adjustable head restraints here with the Type S logo embossed on them, and you can see that this upholstery is heated and ventilated with lots of perforations and a mixture of different materials. We have sort of an imitation suede right there in the middle, the charcoal section over here, and then the white leather in front of it. These seats offer adjustable bolsters. We also have an extending thigh cushion, and the thigh cushion extension is one of the kind where the front of the seat extends out without having a seam. So I like this because it's easier to clean. Things like cookie crumbs and stuff like that doesn't get caught there in the seam like we find in some BMWs. Moving over here to the doors, we find a decent percentage of soft touch materials. Soft touch injection molded plastics on the top, stitched materials right here in the middle. It's an imitation leather insert there. Harder plastics down around the bottom of the door to help improve durability, and nice large bottle holders as you can see down there. Up here we have the Bang & Olufsen speaker system. You can see the Bang & Olufsen logo right there. Aluminum trim right there on the doors, and an interesting twist, we actually have seat memory positions for the passenger seat that I mentioned before. This is one of the first Acuras to get the new Bang & Olufsen audio system. We're going to be seeing a very similar design in the updated MDX shortly, although apparently this is going to be the first model to actually go into production. That aluminum trim continues across the dashboard right there. You can see it gives it kind of a horseshoe themed there. And then just panning across the dashboard so you can get the whole look here, we have kind of a, I guess, muffin top sort of thing going on here with the instrument cluster. There's also a heads-up display. That's why we have that large binnacle there. They decided not to give this that sort of twin tablet perched on the dash look. Instead, they wanted it to look a bit more like the rest of the lineup, where we actually have a cover over the instrument cluster. You can see it's actually quite far in there under that cover. It definitely shields it from strong sunlight a bit more than I had expected. Moving back over to the dashboard, the upper section, that's an injection molded component. We then have a stitched section right there. Thankfully, very little piano black in here. This is actually sort of a mid-gray trim, and that's going to show the scratches a lot less than the piano black that we're seeing in so many different vehicles out there. We have a big bin-style glove compartment. I had no problem fitting an 11-inch tablet computer inside. And then if we move back to the middle of the dashboard, you'll find one definite difference between this and some of the other entries in this segment. We don't have an enormous LCD bank across the dash. It's not like one-piece LCD that we find in some of them. We have one volume knob over here, and that's not part of the LCD. The LCD actually just spans from that corner down there. The rest of the interface is pretty typical. It's very similar to what we see in the Honda Prologue, obviously, again, like the GM products there, and the layout is similar to the GM setup. I think that most folks are not going to have a problem with that at all. The big thing here is that the software is really snappy. We have Apple CarPlay, we have Google Connected Mapping, we also have a lot of Google Connected features. You can voice command a lot of stuff, and a lot of adjustability here. So things like the one-pedal driving, that's easily adjustable with those screen shortcuts. That's where we would find the headlight controls. It's not a separate knob. And then there's an attractive home screen. If I go back, to this little widget here, we get a map view there, we get some infotainment, and you can adjust what these sections are. So if you'd rather have that be the trip computer, you can do that as well. Now moving down from there, we find the start-stop button, 2 big air vents, dual zone automatic climate control with physical knobs for the temperature, and a reasonable amount of buttons. I do like the fact that we have all those physical buttons there. Below that, we have 2 USB inputs. You can either use Apple CarPlay and Android Auto wirelessly, or you can go wired, your choice there. Big storage area. This is not a wireless charge mat. That's just a storage area for whatever you want to store there. 12-volt power outlet there. 2 nice big cup holders, and then this is the wireless charging mat. My phone had no problem fitting in there. There's actually quite a lot of room, and it has no problem charging through those thicker cases. That's a really nice touch. There is a completely flat floor up front, but they choose to put a storage bin right there in the middle. That's handy. So if you want to tuck larger bags or things that might roll around, those edges will help keep them in check. And then moving between the front seats, we find a padded, stitched, covered armrest with lots of storage because, again, no hump down there like we find in the GV70, so this is actually quite large and quite deep. Moving over to the driver's side, again, we have that big binnacle. You can actually see the full color heads-up display right there. Leather wrap to that top, imitation leather wrap to the top of that. And then moving down here, we have the standard LCD instrument cluster. Nice touch with this is that it's configurable, and one of the modes includes either mapping from the factory navigation in the vehicle or mapping from your connected smartphone. That's a really cool touch. Then moving back from there, you notice one of the big reasons to get this over the Honda Prologue, and that is we have essentially Super Cruise. They're calling this hands-free cruise. It's part of the Acura Watch package of systems, but the core thing to know is that they didn't reinvent the wheel. This is General Motors or Cadillac's Super Cruise system, just brought right down here to Acura. And that's a huge advantage because this operates on hundreds of thousands of miles of road in the United States, and it works incredibly well. The driver monitoring system is combined in this rim on the wheel and this little module right there on top of the steering column. And then there's a light bar inside that lights up to show you the various modes of the system. It's really good at driver feedback because if you're doing what you're doing and you're looking at the road, this is really close to your eye line. It flashes, the seat buzzes at you, it vibrates. So it's really easy to tell when you need to take control. The shifter, that's a column mounted shifter right over there. It's one of those electronic kind. That's what that turn signal stock looks like over there on that side. We have the controls for the adaptive cruise control and the hands-free driving system right over here on this side. On this side, you'll find heated steering wheel button, voice command button, some media buttons, and a button to interface with the system. And then on the back of the wheel, this is where we find volume up, down, track forward, backward. I really like volume controls and track up, down controls on the back of the steering wheel, but I wish we had two paddles rather than just the single paddle right here for the regenerative braking. This basically commands more regenerative braking. You have to hold it down, and that's going to give you extra regen braking. Of course, we have the one pedal driving mode in there as well, and the system gives you blended braking, but you have to use the control here to adjust the various different modes of one pedal driving. So if I hit the set level button, you can see we get off, normal, and high. The other thing that you should probably know is that the drive mode selector, it's way down here. So over here we have this little mode toggle, and then we have this button over here, which is the adjustment for the air suspension height. As you toggle through the drive modes, they're going to show over here on the infotainment system, but you can't just click on one of these drive modes. All you can do is edit the individual drive mode on this screen. The operation of the air suspension is going to show up here on the instrument cluster. If I toggle through those modes, you're going to see that on the right side, and then on the left side, you're going to get a little white icon that turns green down there whenever the system is airing up or airing down. The adaptive air suspension is going to be the big difference between the Type S and the regular ZDX models. The regular ZDX models don't get airlift and they don't get adaptive dampers of any kind. All right, let's get the ZDX out on the road. Probably the first thing I guess we should say is that even though we recorded 0 to 60 in 4.7 seconds, you're not always going to get it.
No, if you're in normal mode, you're going to get almost a second less or a second more 0 to 60 because if you want all the power, you have to put the car in sport mode.
Yeah, it's going to dial the torque down a little bit, and that gives us 0 to 60 in 5.5 seconds, which is still pretty swift. But you know, if you want that kick in the pants kind of feel, you're definitely going to need to be in sport mode.
Right.
And all of the various drive modes are going to adjust the throttle mapping essentially, or the accelerator pedal mapping, since it doesn't actually have a throttle. Snow mode is going to be the most relaxed, and I am actually kind of happy that they're not calling it an off-road mode. They're just calling it snow.
Yeah, for a vehicle like this, off-road is not what it's going to be used for, so why have a mode for it?
Although we do get more ground clearance than average. This will pump itself up to 8 inches if you get the adaptive air suspension.
And snow is the most likely scenario I see that happening.
Yeah, it's definitely where you're going to want that extra clearance, and that's certainly a logical reason to get this over, you know, a wide variety of the competition, especially some of those really low EVs like a GV60 or a Mustang Mach-E. Those are pretty low to the ground. Bearing in mind this is almost a 6,000-pound EV, it's got a really big battery. Stopping distance, it took 138 feet from 60 to 0.
Yeah, that is not an overly impressive number, but it's also not terribly surprising. We do have pretty wide tires, especially on this Type S model. We have big brakes, but we have a lot of car to stop.
A lot of car to stop, and I said at the beginning of the episode, I'm going to come back to the summer tires. This is where I'm going to come back to them, because if you don't get the summer tires, and if you get the base ZDX, you're not going to get as wide a tire, so those are going to take a little bit longer to stop, most likely.
Yeah, they'll get a little bit lighter overall, but it's not enough to make a huge difference in that.
And big caution to everybody, of course, we have not been driving this at home, so that 138 feet should not be directly compared to any other EV we have tested. Just keep that as sort of a general idea in the back of your head. Hopefully we'll have one of these at home so we can run it through that usual battery of tests soon, and we should have some more complete numbers there at that time. Anyway, you slice it though, it's going to take a little bit long. because of the weight.
Exactly.
We've made our way to a nice windy section of this road, but it's not perfectly paved.
No.
And I think that really shows off both the ride quality in the ZDX and the handling ability, the dynamics of the ZDX, because even in the all-wheel drive model like this, most of the power is still happening back there on the rear axle.
Yeah, and from the passenger seat, it's been a pretty comfortable ride. And you can feel that as we get into the corners, it is well balanced. We're not getting a lot of body roll. Obviously, it's not very, very tight, which is what it shouldn't be. This is meant to be a comfortable cruiser, but it's handled everything so far pretty well.
Yeah, it has a nice, I would say it feels as heavy as the curb weight would indicate.
Yeah.
I like the steering, but the ride quality has that really nice road car kind of feel, I would say. If you're gonna take something out on the highway for 5-6 hours, this is definitely the kind of ride quality that I would like, thanks to that air suspension.
Yeah, it feels like the suspension is working, not overworking, not underworking, just working, and that's exactly where you want it.
As far as ride quality goes, cabin noise, etc., I would say this actually is pretty similar to the Mercedes-Benz and the BMW EV competition, two competitors that Acura was definitely mentioning in their presentation earlier. I don't see that much cross-shopping there somehow between those options. Those are going to be quite a bit more expensive than this. Also, they're going to have kind of a different luxury feel and more performance, of course, as well.
Yeah.
But I could see a reasonable number of people cross-shopping this with a Model Y, which is going to be a lot less expensive.
It is, but it's also going to ride very differently.
Yes.
So that's the everyday experience. You are looking at two totally different machines where they might have some interior, space that's similar, but this is a much more comfortable place to be, especially if you do a lot of time on the road.
Yeah, the Model Y can have that firm and bouncy feel even with the comfort suspension. This has a lot of performance, not quite as much performance as the Model Y, of course, but even driving it more spiritedly around these roads, it's very, very comfortable.
Now, it is balanced around these roads. You will get a little bit more of like a sporty vibe from the Model Y. It is lighter and it feels lighter, but again, what you want on and how roughly paved your roads are really going to determine how much you would enjoy one or the other.
Exactly. And on some of these road surfaces here where you're really, switching back and forth in these switchbacks here, you're definitely going to notice the added curb weight. I think that the low center of gravity really makes this feel good though. I mean, it has a nice comfortable feel, really good power balance. You can really feel that rear electric motor helping you turn and scoot that rear end in the corners like that. It's an awful lot of fun. And I think that they've done a good job with the adaptive air part, because in low speed maneuvers, if you're just slowing down here, for instance, and I waggle the steering wheel around, it kind of has a floaty feel sometimes, just, there. But in the corners, it doesn't feel that way. It feels really buttoned down and really level.
Yeah.
The last thing we should talk about is fuel efficiency, or electric efficiency, if you will, even it's technically a fuel. We've been averaging 2.1 miles per kilowatt hour over the last 75 miles. Now, we have been driving quickly. We've been spent a lot of time on the highway initially at 70 miles an hour with the cruise control set. And of course, we've gone up and over some mountain passes. Keep that in mind. But you will get more fuel efficient options.
Yeah, there are definitely other vehicles out there just based on the shape that are going to do a lot better on the highway. Maybe they are less powerful than this and you're going to get more efficiency out of that. We are in the Type S. We have the stickiest tires. It is not specifically aerodynamically shaped. This is kind of what we would expect, but it's still a little bit on the disappointing side.
Yeah, if you want the range, you need the big battery pack.
Right.
But the big battery pack comes with extra weight, which of course means lower efficiency. So there's obviously going to be some trade-offs with that. I think that the GV70 is an interesting comparison to this, because the GV70's range is really fairly low. It's right around 220, 230 miles, not out on the highway.
Right.
It's maybe 200 miles of highway driving, but it will charge in 18 minutes. So, depending on the kind of road trip that you're doing, if you're doing San Francisco Bay Area to Los Angeles, which is a pretty common road trip commute corridor for a lot of people that live in the biggest state in the country, or the most populous state in the country, I should say, this is the kind of vehicle where you still could not do that with a full battery and get there to the other side. You would need to charge, but you may not need to charge for too long. Maybe 20 minutes here, something like that.
Yeah, it's that balance where you're going to have to stop, but that stop will take you longer, but do you need as much because you have enough in reserve?
Yeah, and in the Genesis, you'd probably need to stop twice, but they'd only be 15-minute stops maybe in order to get you to that 400-mile or 450-mile range figure that you might need to do to get from one of those cities to the other.
Right.
It's going to depend on your particular preferences around road tripping. Are you the kind of person that likes to stop every, 3 hours or 2 hours, or do you just want to go all the way on one battery?
And I personally would be the one who would prefer to stop, but to each their own. And,
Mm-hmm.
and both of those vehicles, the GV70 and this, are going to be comfortable to spend that time in as well.
Yep, and this is why we don't road trip, because I do not stop. Like, there is no stopping. Like, you need to pee, you should have made better life choices and just don't drink anything. Don't eat, don't drink, and you go straight from A to B, regardless of how many miles that may be.
We'll
800, good. Let's just Bay Area to Phoenix, one run, baby.
We'll agree to take separate cars.
Yes, but I'll get there first. How much the ZDX will cost is going to depend largely on whether or not you qualify for the federal tax credit. Now that the tax credit is a point of sale rebate, effectively the big thing to know is your adjusted gross income has to be below the particular IRS limits for your tax filing situation. You don't have to have a minimum tax liability anymore. This starts at $64,500 plus destination, less the $7,500, gets you to $58,350. That's going to buy you the rear-wheel drive model. If you want all-wheel drive, that's an extra $4,000 because, of course, you get a reasonable amount more power thanks to that electric motor up front. Is the ZDX a good deal? That's kind of a tricky question because it largely depends on what exactly you're cross-shopping this against and which trim, of course, of the ZDX you're looking at. A Cadillac is going to be a little bit more expensive or a little bit less expensive depending on the exact model we're talking about. And of course, a Tesla Model Y, it's going to be at least $30,000 less expensive than the Type S trim that we're looking at right here for something with relatively similar performance, but a very different feel and obviously a very different look. I think one of the reasons to get the ZDX is that it's really attractive. And even though we don't have a storage space under the hood, I do think that the long hood profile really is part of the reason that the ZDX looks so good to my eye. It is significantly less expensive than a BMW iX. Acura really wants you to think of the Type S as kind of a BMW iX, kind of an SQ8 e-tron, kind of an EQE 500 competitor. All of those are going to be upwards of $85,000 to $90,000. This is going to be significantly less expensive. Of course, a Genesis GV70 is going to be less expensive than this at around $66,450 or so versus the $67,000 effective price point that we find in this model. Now, the Genesis is going to be quicker 0 to 60, but it's not going to get you as far on a charge. And it does have this long hood profile, but it's not based on a dedicated EV platform. So there's certainly some compromises to the interior geometry and the storage areas, etc. This has a more practical interior. On the other hand, I think the Genesis looks really, really pretty. Let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section. Which looks better, this or the GV70? In my mind, that's the toughest competitor outside of the Tesla lineup, is that Genesis model. The Lexus RZ, it's pretty pricey at $64,430. This, I think, is worth every penny of the extra price tag. The performance is better, the dynamics are better, it's more attractive, the interior is more attractive as well. The Lexus RZ, it comes across as certainly uncompetitive in the Lexus format. I actually think that the BZ4X is just fine for its price tag. Yes, it doesn't charge very quickly. No, it doesn't go as far as some of the competition. However, it is pretty affordable and it stacks up really quite well against the base entries from most of the electric car manufacturers out there. The ZDX, it's quite a different beast. And in the luxury segment, I think this compares really favorably against that Lexus. My bottom line, at least for the moment, is that the ZDX would definitely be on my list, but I'm not sure if I would put it on my list above the GV70. It would sort of depend on how much range you need. For me, I don't road trip regularly in the average vehicle that I own, so I don't think that the range figures in the GV70 would be too much of a problem. And if you did want to take those longer road trips, it does charge very rapidly, with a whole bunch of asterisks. Keep in mind the GV70's 800-volt architecture means that charging at a supercharger station, if you have access to one, is going to be a lot slower than this charging. So that 18-minute charge only applies to 800-volt appropriate compatible CCS stations when they're functioning, of course. And this is going to have access to the NACS network, the Tesla supercharging network, via an adapter into that CCS port there in the front. And because this is a 400-volt native vehicle, it's going to charge at the exact same speed at a CCS station or a Tesla supercharger station. It is going to take a little bit longer, but this does give you more options. I also really love the look of this, and If lease rates are appropriate, if lease rates are pretty similar to the competition, that's another reason you might want to check out the ZDX. We don't know all of the lease rates at the time I'm shooting this video, but it's entirely possible that the lease rates could actually be very comparable to the Model Y. And because a lot of people in this segment lease, there may not really be that much of a difference. If you want to buy one of these versus a Model Y, that Model Y is going to be a lot less expensive, but if you want to lease it, it's possible they could actually be pretty similar. Let me know what you think about all that down there in the comment section below, and what would you pick if your cash were on the line? And of course, sound off as to whether Apple CarPlay and Android Auto support is a big concern to you, because that is the big reason to get this over the Cadillac, just like that's a big reason to get the Prologue over the Blazer, because this has Apple CarPlay. And I am really intrigued by that, because General Motors could very clearly put CarPlay and Android Auto on their EVs. They choose not to. This uses the exact same infotainment hardware with some Honda tweaks, and the biggest of those tweaks is giving customers what they say they want. If you haven't already done so, be sure and find us over at Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all those other social places. I'll see all of you next week.